Welcome to DM the PM podcast, where we cut through the noise of product jargon to deliver actionable step-by-step insights from industry practitioners, helping founders and product leaders turn complex concepts into clear, practical strategies they can apply today. I'm Diana. I'm your podcast host. I'm a product coach and consultant. I help startups and mid-sized tech companies build impactful products in weeks, not months. I help drive business growth by creating an efficient product development process, validating ideas early, and establishing effective customer feedback loops. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to Joelle. She's an incredible product designer with vast experience across ClearScore, Practi, and now NatWest. And I really love all your community and social media. So you're definitely a very rounded person tapping into a lot of creative outlets. We both worked at ClearScore, and we also kind of shared a lot of thoughts around being self-employed, but also what does it mean to work with, product managers, to work with product designers to build really good experiences. So thank you so much for joining me today. And the focus today is going to be really understanding what does it mean to be a great product designer with a focus on user research and validation processes. So Joelle, thank you so much for coming. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly and tell us how you got into design?
Yeah, hi, thanks for inviting me on the podcast, Anna. Again, my name is Joelle. I'm a product designer, currently at NatWest, all views of my own, of course. And yeah, so I took an unconventional route into product design. Initially, I wanted to go to art school when I was doing my GCSEs and stuff, but then I kind of got burnt out by just creating for the sake of creating. I'm sure many of you will know the feeling of, when you're just going through the motions, it sucks. So I went into sociology at university. I did a brief stint in marketing before realizing that it wasn't creative enough for me. So that's when I discovered UX design, and I was like, what is this? And so I taught myself the basics. I did an internship, and about 3 to 4 years later, here we are.
And what would you say, what was the best part of your job?
The best part of my job, and what I always say in interviews, always, is the marriage between creativity and problem solving, and also just a focus on people, because I study sociology. It's all about how people work, how society comes to be how it is, different influences, and design is really about that. How does technology interact with people with technology and their surrounding? How does that influence how they use our products? And design, obviously, for designers, that's just super fascinating for me. And if we're talking about the process of design, I love when all the super messy parts of discovery, when you have big questions, everything seems like it's really messy, but then it all comes together in a really clear solution. That is the most satisfying part of the process for me.
Nice. I mean, it's really interesting that you're saying you're quite creative, but also you studied, is it sociology you said?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's definitely how do people think. And I was actually thinking, because I recently did a psychology course, and then I was like, actually, what is the value of studying people and how they interact with things? And do you think that's actually do you think that gives you an extra edge in your role? Do you think that's helping you in your role?
I think so, yeah. Because at the end of the day, my assumption is that a lot of you who are listening to the podcast are working on building products, building digital products. The user experience and the user journey isn't just when someone logs into your app or logs into your platform or website. It's actually, okay, why did they decide to do that in the first place? What experiences compelled them to do that, whether that's, internal or external circumstances. For example, they lost their job, or they're hungry, things like that go beyond what is just the digital. So it's really important to consider the holistic journey. And I think actually studying people, social sciences like psychology and sociology, is actually really, really helpful for any sort of product role, I'd say. Yeah, what did you find most interesting about your psychology course?
But I think it was I've learned a lot about how connected things are. And this course definitely had a lot of biology into it as well. So that was an area I was like, okay, this is really interesting to know. And I think that, there's so much creating awareness of how do people think or what influences decisions, or I think that's just the more knowledge you have that you're building over time, the more you'll be like, sometimes making those quick decisions on what's the focus area, just because I think you're kind of improving your educated guesses, isn't it? It all goes into
Exactly.
that type of bucket.
Yeah. Just
And
having more context.
exactly. And now that we're kind of talking about customers, I wanted to ask, there's so many companies out there that are talking about being customer centric. And I've also seen them, some companies implemented some questionable ways. There's a lot of misunderstanding around that. But what does it mean to you to be customer centric?
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Like, a lot of companies claim to be customer or like user centric, and there are ones that will listen more to their users. But ultimately, like, what does that mean? It's not just like a marketing gimmick, like, oh yeah, we love listening to our customers. It's a fine balance. I think for me, it means putting the user's needs like at the forefront of the products we're building and designing. Because ultimately, if you don't have customers, you don't have a business. So if we're thinking about it in that lens, then actually being customer centric is very valuable to businesses. And like any product, any designer will have to do that to ensure that we're actually building the right thing. Yeah, because often, like, if we're not listening to customers, we're just listening to our own needs and desires, we might end up building something that there is no market need for, which is the worst thing to happen if you're trying to make like a profitable business. So yeah, we all have great ideas, but they need to be validated if there's like an actual need for them with customers.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I think in the podcast a bit later we'll go into how do you, go about capturing those user needs, because it's kind of like, if you don't know product, especially product design, I think it's really hard to get your head around what the techniques or tools you can use, because people could, there's so many layers of being customer centric. Maybe some people think that, well, if I talk to, and again, I think there are differences between B2C and B2B, but let's say if I talk to one customer every month, that's good. And then they tell me that they love my product or whatever it is, that's enough for me. So I think that's also a good thing to kind of dive into at some point. Yeah.
I've worked with a lot of different PMs and like founders and things like that, and having a user-centric mindset is actually so useful for all types of roles. A lot of the times you'll be working with data and being able to identify like customers' actions and pairing that with feedback sessions is actually really powerful. Then you can go into like the why. Again, we'll go into that a little bit later. But yeah, having that mindset is really useful for all types of roles.
And that's a really good point. So two things. One is obviously I'm a true believer of that same loop that you're talking about. Like, if you solve your customer needs really well, that then makes your customers loyal. So that's kind of the loop you go through as a business. But the other thing that you mentioned is having that customer centric mindset. And there's definitely some education sometimes that is required. What would you say are the core elements of the product designer role?
Yeah. So first of all, there are lots of overlaps between like a product manager, product owner kind of role with product design. So obviously there are going to be overlap where you're doing sort of discovery, user needs, that sort of stuff. You can work together and things like that. But like a core element of a product design role is really translating that user need and business value into like a holistically functional experience that drives that desired business outcome, whatever it is. And usually this includes digital screens, but like I said before, has to take into account like non-digital contexts, environments, personal circumstances, and that depends on like the user that you're serving and the product that you're designing. So yeah, that's really the core of what it is to be a designer. Obviously, you're going to come out with screens at the end. That's the key deliverable. But there's a lot of work that gets us to that point.
And I think it might actually be useful to go into it, because one thing I'm noticing by talking to startups at different stages and coming back to people who maybe don't have that customer-centric mindset or like that product-orientated mindset, I've seen a lot of companies build digital products without product design function. There's just, I guess you get the basics right and things work, especially if you're in a B2B, you're building a B2B product, because obviously sales is a lot more important then. And, I guess once you have something that solves the problem, design comes in sometimes as an afterthought. So I just wanted to ask, what would you say is the core value that a product designer adds? Because deliverable is some screens, and you said there's a lot of stuff happening in the middle. Yeah, talk me through that a bit.
Yeah, that's very true. Companies can be built with just tech as an engineering, and we see a lot of tech-led companies, tech-led teams in some large companies, and honestly, it's having that customer-centric mindset that helps you whether you have a product designer or not. But having a product designer will help you, will free up your headspace in that area, especially if you're a founder with an early stage startup, to focus on founder things and not have to think about, exactly how does this user experience get affected. Like, you can have a designer that will help you build the right thing, get that product market fit, and like reduce time wasting building the wrong thing, because they can be specialized doing the research and discovery and like iterative design. So ultimately, you're just reducing time and money. That's a massive value add. This is obviously the same for like a large company, but like translating that user need into business value is also really good, in addition to like improving brand perception, especially if you're a more established company with a lot of legacy products or like outdated UIs and experiences, that can really impact how a customer views your product as well.
Nice. I like the focus on obviously reducing time to market and like reducing time to actually find product market fit. And this is a good way to take us into Mythbuster section, which is share some of the things that people tend to get wrong about product design. I'm sure you're faced with quite a few of them.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned is having design as like an afterthought. Depending on like the design maturity of a company. I don't really love that phrase, but let's just use it. Sometimes design can be just brought in at the end of like, oh yeah, let's just like make it pretty, or let's just put in like the finishing touches. But actually, again, talking about like the value of design, the value of what we can add is actually so much more limited than if we're brought in further towards the beginning of the process, so that we can help you identify if the problem is even the right problem to be solving. It's the same as working with engineers. If I'm talking to designers, I'll always say like bring in engineers like at the start of the process, because then we can understand like what are the constraints, what are the tech constraints, what are things that we should be mindful of, like what error states do we need to know about, so that when we're designing something, we can design something that considers all of that, rather than waiting to the end and then engineers being like, oh wait, we can't build that. It's the same for design. So make sure we're all involved towards the beginning. And something that I see a lot of is designers working by themselves, and actually we should be working as like a team alongside PM and like engineering peers, working together to again produce that most optimal solution, because we can't know everything by ourselves, we aren't expected to, and so that's why there's the different roles that we can work together. So yeah, it's just making sure we're not siloed, and also we're all involved towards the beginning of the process.
That's a really good point on collaborating, because a lot of companies I've been in, design as a group is actually really good at having sharing sessions. So I always found that design, especially when it comes to brainstorming ideas, because there's a space where, okay, we know we're solving this problem. How can we solve this problem in the best way? And then designers go off, and there's a lot of creativity, but there's also a lot of, you need diversity of thought. Of course, you can get that from involving the rest of the team, but it's better to take a step back. So yeah, the best design teams I've seen is when they are sharing with other designers in the company.
Yeah, no, to add to that, yeah, it's ensuring that we aren't overlapping in work. Or if we are, then we have to work together and understand, like, are there then dependencies on that sort of thing. So yeah, it's really important to not work in silos generally. So yeah, usually like having like a multidisciplinary, multifunction squad is, in my experience, a really good way to go.
Interesting. Actually, I guess for bigger companies, yeah, it's also very important to have a consistent user experience that you're building across everyone. Are there any other things people have said that you're like, that's not really what a product designer does?
Well, a big one is like, oh, so you're a graphic designer or something. That's always a funny one. I'm like, no, I mean, I can't graphic design if that's what you're asking me to do. No, I also can't do branding. So yeah, don't ask me for that. Some designers can. Some designers come from a design background, but like I said, I don't. So I think that's why like I personally enjoy more of like the problem solving bit of it, even though, you know, it's always fun to like just go into the into like Figma and like polish the screens, whatever. But that comes towards the end of the process.
That's a good point, because I think design always has this anchoring of you deliver the journey, so you're able to create some screens. But maybe one thing that I've seen in the past is people kind of limited to, oh yeah, I can create screens, or AI can now create screens, so we don't need designers anymore. But there's so much around user journey mapping and service design that are so valuable that I think a lot of people don't know about.
Yes. I mean, I don't know how much we want to get into AI here, but yeah, like that's a big question like I get within like my design like community that I've kind of built. Like a lot of them are like, oh, should I even get into design? Is AI going to make design obsolete? I'm not sure what the approach to AI in product management and like founder spaces are, but yeah, you know, tools like Figma, who are coming out with like big prototyping capabilities, Midjourney, ChatGPT, being able to give you different wireframes, journey maps, suggestions. That can all feel a bit scary. But this actually, I think it's quite exciting, because then it frees you up to do more of the more interesting work rather than just like the visuals. And sure, like AI is like, number one, it's new, but not completely new. It's still not like completely reliable. Therefore, number two, we still need humans to like fact check things and make sure that as a human, this feels like a good experience, because I don't know how much a robot can feel that yet.
Well, and to add to that, I think there's like another layer of it, which is they can design really well for the current journeys. So if you're like designing an e-commerce website, it's like, great, those are the interactions that we have proven out over time that are the most efficient, engaging, whatever. But there's a lot of lack of knowledge, and there's a lot of exploration on how do you interact with the AI in the first place. You know, that journey needs to be designed, and there isn't much knowledge on that. So someone has to go through the whole, let's understand the problem, let's iterate it, let's look at different solutions. So yeah, I think there's still a lot of room for, and coming back to what we said at the beginning, psychology, sociology, it's like, you gotta understand how is that person thinking, feeling in that moment. And those are all considerations that I know like full-fledged product designers are considering when thinking through the steps of a journey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there are a lot of new sort of roles that are coming out because of a bit more embracing of AI. So like AI designers, obviously like people who are designing for AI, conversation designers who are working on things like voice chat and chatbots and things like that, which is actually really interesting. So if anything, there's a lot more interesting spaces that are kind of coming out because of.
Yeah, exactly. So we chatted through product design and a bit of like what the misconceptions, but now we can really go deeper into understanding some of the techniques as part of product design. So we can start with frequently asked questions related to user research. User research sometimes can feel like a big black box of, okay, maybe there's only one way, or everyone has their own mental model of what it might be. And I wanted to ask, like, what are the different types of user interviews and when do you use each one of them?
Yeah, it's a good question because at the end of the day, I feel like we should be choosing the method based on what the problem is and, you know, what we're trying to find out, right? So a lot of people ask me, like, what methods do you use? I prefer to think of it as like I have a toolbox of a lot of different methods, frameworks, whatever, but we start at the problem first and then we decide how to tackle it and steer it towards whatever our desired outcome is. And that is what I think we should have before getting into interviews, because if we're just going around interviewing people and we have no idea why we're doing it, like, we might as well not be doing it. But as for what the different types of interviews are, let's say we're doing interviews, mainly it's just moderated and unmoderated. Moderated means that we're talking like synchronously, like in live time, like we're doing right now. And it's usually for like discovery or exploratory research when there are a lot of risks that we need to validate. So we want more qualitative insights rather than quantitative. And so we're able to dig deeper into questions, we're able to ask follow-up questions. Also, we can understand like body language, facial expressions, things like that, that really inform and give like another layer to the insights that we're getting. For unmoderated testing, it's or unmoderated interviews or testing is usually for like usability testing. Also, it can give us a larger sample size of research because it's unmoderated. You don't need someone sitting there hour by hour. It takes a lot of it's a lot of time to interview. So using unmoderated techniques is really useful for that. So you can do usability testing. You can use platforms like Maze, user testing. What else is there? Listener, whatever. And they'll allow you to just send out a mass recruitment for users to sign up. And then you can literally do your own work, go away, come back, and you'll have like 15 responses and you didn't have to do anything apart from like the initial setup and ensuring you have something to test, of course. But yeah, those are the general reasons why you would use either of them. But there are a lot of different techniques as well. So like surveys, you can do observation. That's more moderated, like you'd have to be in person. Those are kind of the main ones.
Interesting. So if we're thinking about early on founders trying to find product market fit, what are kind of do you have like certain problems, and then when you have this type of problems, this is the type of research you should be doing?
Yes, yeah, definitely. So like I said, for startups and founders who are really at that beginning stage, what you should be doing more of is that first type, that moderated conversation, speaking directly to your customers, so that you are not trying to interpret like secondary data. So like actually go in and speak to your customers, or over Zoom if you can't see them in person. That was a big difference for when I've worked at like 2 startups. One of them, we didn't really speak to customers at all, and we were changing directions all the time, let's just say. Whereas when I worked at another startup, it was we did a lot of customer research sessions. We'd have like an agenda and we'd have like these things that we want to validate, and we'd ask them questions around it. And it was really, really useful because then, yeah, we're able to get insights directly from them and, yeah, really understand their pain points and the problem that then you can solve as a business, which is ultimately what we're trying to do.
And that's a really good point, because I think you mentioned it a bit earlier when you were like, well, if you don't know what was the purpose of the research and what questions you're trying to get from your users, might as well not do the research. If you go without an agenda, or if you go with leading questions, or if you go with, would you like this type of thing? And even if you talk to 100 people, you probably won't get any valuable information about whether your thing, when you're building it, is actually going to work. And I think when it comes to especially moderated research, I wanted to ask if you have like kind of like a checklist of, okay, those are the key things you need to have ready to ensure that you run effective user research sessions to identify user needs.
Yeah, always have a plan. Like, you can't just go into it be like, hey, let's talk about this topic. So obviously, number one, we need like a business problem that we're trying to tackle. So whether it's something that's established or we have a hypothesis that we're trying to test. So we think that X is a problem. We want to see if it is or it isn't, and then like craft your questions around that. And also the other thing is understanding what you're going to do with the results of the research, because again, research is there to be used. And if you're not using the insights, then like, again, there's no point. So if you're going to use that to, let's say you're doing discovery research, you're doing some moderated interviews as a founder, the next step would, for example, be producing some prototypes, and then go again to do some usability testing. Yeah, understand why you're doing the research, understand what you're going to do with the research, and then, build out your questions from there. There's usually like a script that I like to follow. So it's like the intro, building that rapport, there's no right or wrong answer, making sure that like everyone feels very comfortable. But yeah, again, like, I think we'll go into a bit as well in terms of leading questions, making sure you actually go through and do a test run of your interviews is really important. I found every time that I didn't do a test run, something always goes wrong. So yeah, learn from me and don't do that.
I mean, you can definitely tell us like a bit more about leading questions and why they're bad and how can you actually move away from them.
Yeah. And that's why it's really important to have a plan, because it's really easy to fall into those leading questions. We don't even realize that we're doing it. Like, when I go off script, sometimes I'll find myself asking leading questions and then I'll have to stop and correct it a bit. So overall, what a leading question is trying to nudge the participant into a certain type of direction or a certain type of answer. So I'll give you an example to make it easier. Asking a participant, how useful do you think this feature is? This assumes that the participant finds it useful, and then the participant is going to frame their answer around whether it's useful or not, when actually they could have said something completely different, and you're now trying to move the conversation in that direction. So instead, what I would normally say is, what's your experience been with this feature? If you're trying to target a certain feature, then they can talk about, when I use this, it wasn't great, or like in this certain situation, rather than like pigeonholing the answer into like usefulness, which is quite an arbitrary concept. Yeah, which then could potentially skew your answers, skew your results, which is not good, because if you're going to do something with those results, then it could have like a knock-on effect. And the other thing is, you could also be introducing your own bias, and these questions could be just confirmation bias, which is where you're just validating your own opinion. Sometimes the problem with research is that we do research to prove a point, which shouldn't really be this shouldn't really be the case. I get that sometimes there are stakeholders which don't agree with you, and you're like, yeah, let's just do some research so we can show that customers actually want this. We shouldn't be doing that, ideally, because then, again, you're just validating your own opinion. You're going to be asking those biased questions, and that actually could lead to building the wrong thing, which we talked about earlier, which we don't want to do. So yeah, we need to make sure there's no leading questions as much as possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of time is like, obviously a lot of people might have the fear of like talking to customers or interviewing people, but people who don't have that, they'll be like, it's a very straightforward thing. I just go out there and ask people a bunch of questions. But I definitely think that there's there's an art to it, and it's a fine line. It's so easy to just make your results meaningless by really kind of asking the questions. And I've done this a few times, because especially at the beginning when I was starting out, and I didn't have a product designer when I was working in that company. And I went there and I was like, oh, I'm just going to talk to customers. And yeah, we were asking questions like, would you like this? And I was like, but the thing is, it doesn't even give you exactly what you're saying. What do I do after that? I just go off and build this. Okay, which part of it do I build? I think research is like, if at the end of it, you can't get to quite specific sentences from those sessions, I think you were probably too vague in it. If you can't actually say, okay, they struggle with this and this and this, or I've noticed those challenges. I think you haven't got the right balance.
Yeah. And another thing is actually crafting the questions is really hard. I'm not saying it's easy at all. I find it really, really hard. And so if I have researchers to help me, I will lean on them. So yeah, crafting those questions takes a lot of time if you don't know like how to link it with your research goals. So yeah, it's really important to understand like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And word it in the correct way or the best way.
Yeah, definitely. And now we can go into, okay, there's obviously user research where you identify a lot of the problems. Then there's also the part in product design around designing the right solution. So can you please share like some key considerations when you're designing a new solution?
Yeah, so specifically a new solution. It's got to be a functional solution and work with the rest of the product that you already have, if you have another product, if you have a product already. So the things I always consider is the customer need, the key need. Often the core need is deeper than what the initial struggle is. So for example, an initial struggle we might see is like, oh, people are finding it hard to log on, for example, to this app. That's the initial struggle. But actually, if you go and do some research around it, you might actually find that, it's actually not they're coming from a certain place. They're not coming from the app store. They might be downloading it or trying to log on like on the tube or something. Like, you need to know more context around it. So that's what I always look at as well. Of course, like the business problem, what are you trying to solve? Are you trying to increase engagement? Are you trying to increase revenue, reduce attrition, things like that? And then like what's the scope? What's in scope? What's out of scope? Is this like a massive feature that we're trying to build, or are we trying to validate it like one bit at a time? What's the most important thing? And honestly, like I would do this with my PM. I wouldn't do this by myself. And trying to understand like what are the knowns versus the unknowns. Knowns being like previous research, previous data, any explicit feedback you've gotten from customers or through sales or customer support, things like that. And what unknowns we have. So I mentioned like the reason we do a lot of qualitative moderated interviews is when we're doing like exploratory research, so when we don't know a lot of things. So usually like when there's a lot of risk for the new product. So yeah, that's how we kind of decide how much discovery we're going to do versus going more straight into the solution. Yeah, and then of course there's like dependencies and constraints, like do we have a lot of time? Do we have money? Do we have like tech support? Do we need to do like a refactor? We love that. I don't know. Yeah, a lot of different things, but yeah, especially when it's a new solution, yeah, there's got to be discovery around that.
Interesting. And I think, yeah, the limitations, that's a really good one. I feel like we should definitely highlight those for any new product a lot earlier, both for design but also for engineering, to be like, okay, well, what are the constraints of building this, or how much effort realistically we want to put into this against the value you're going to get from it. And I think there's like some great solutions you can build with constraints, but awareness of those allows design and engineering to actually think about more creative solutions. And there's also a lot of brainstorming of, okay, this is what we want to, those are the requirements around this, but then what are the different options? And I know designers, like, you spend a lot of time, as we mentioned earlier, reviewing it, peer reviewing it, going through so many iterations of the designs before they're like, okay, this is the one that answers it.
Yeah. And also talking about testing earlier on, like research, you don't need to test everything. Some things should be tested, but not everything. Because again, if you're just testing something that has already been researched before, then you're just duplicating work. You're taking extra time that doesn't need to be done. But, if there are a lot of things that we don't know, then that needs to be tested.
Yeah, which that kind of brings me to one of my final questions, which is around prototypes. Like, they're also another method of validating ideas at speed. When and how do product designers use prototypes?
So if we're talking about the product design process, it's usually when we have done some sort of designing, we've already validated kind of what the problem is, and we're trying to create a solution. So prototyping is really useful when we're trying to gather feedback or understand how customers are interacting with the pages, if they understand how clear things are on a page, if it solves whatever problem we're trying to solve. It's usually like after the first design, and then we'll test it, do the testing with prototypes, and then iterate if needed.
Would you say that you would do prototype testing for every new feature?
It would depend on the type of feature. So if it's a small one, we might do like a single page prototype. If it's more of like a full-on new feature, new journey, then we would do like a full flow, like a clickable prototype that the user can actually go through as if they're on their laptop or they're on their phone, so that it's realistic. But yeah, not necessarily everything needs to be a prototype. Sometimes you can launch in the live app, the live website, and gather data from that as well. But I always feel like when you have a multi-pronged approach, then you have more confidence in the solution that you're putting out there. But I will say, if it's really slow to build and release your product, some like really big companies have really slow release cycle, then I would definitely do a lot more testing, a lot more prototype testing to understand like, yeah, we're actually going to build this, because you don't want to get to that like 2 months, 3 months like release and be like, whoops, that doesn't work, or that doesn't make sense. So yeah, it depends on your type of company, your tech stack, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, if you're like a founder, I would try and prototype a lot.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. I think I was reading in I think it's Marty Kagan's book. There's like a product goes through, or like every feature goes to like 15 iterations, and I think it depends on the product as well, because you could go through a lot more or a lot less. But that just highlights there's a lot of quantity, there's a lot of refinement, and the quicker you the more you move those iterations into the prototype, so you're like the speed of changing those and the cost of changing those is a lot lower than moving all of this into like the live environment. And then if you have to do like 5 iterations of it and it takes 3 months for each, then yeah, it's adding up. Well, you could have done 10 of them in like 2 weeks prototype testing and quickly iterating on it. So makes a lot of sense. Now we're at the kind of the final section, which is around the threshold concept. This is kind of sharing with people what is the minimum information that someone needs to understand to be able to kind of get their head around product design.
Yep. So yeah, there's a basic understanding of visual design, even if you're not a designer. Lawsofux.com is a good site. So even if you're not a designer, you can understand the different concepts and therefore understand the value of it a bit more. Things like the law of proximity, how close things are grouped together. That means that, customers are more likely to associate those things with each other. So that could impact the customer experience. And also, gathering customer feedback and translating those into designs, which ultimately translate into business value, whatever you're trying to solve, whatever the problem that your business is trying to solve. And Design also helps you to understand like how you're solving the problem. So with different methods, different interview techniques, and yeah, just understanding whether you're solving the right problem in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few layers. I like this website, Laws of UX. I'll definitely check it out. The core of it is really deeply understanding or having a good structure of the user problems and the match between these are the problems, here's how our solution is going to do it, and then have the techniques to keep iterating until it matches, until the customer is like satisfied or has completed their need or their like job to be done or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Nice.
like I said, the key delivery for a designer is the screen, but is understanding like how we get there. That is could be the most important thing.
Thank you so much for this. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your thoughts on what does it actually, require to effectively solve problems through design.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much. If anyone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way?
So either LinkedIn, which is just my name, Joelle, or Instagram, where my username is Joelle Designer. So JOELLE Designer, one word.
I'll put the links in the podcast as well if anyone wants to reach out. So thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.